A critical reading of phylogeographic genetic data supports the hypothesis of populations moving from deep inside Africa up towards the Nile Valley, Northwest Africa, the Levant, and the Greek areas. Today we'll be talking about the wide reach of the ancient black person. Looking at this paper today on the African origins of the Afro-Asiatic language family, which they always tried to say was some sort of Asian thing, which was abandoned long ago. Let's get right into it. Right here, Mr. Arid and Mr. Kieta start off by writing that Diamond and Bellwood suggested that food production and the Afro-Asiatic language family were both brought from the Near East. And we can see right here where they wrote that this idea has been generally abandoned. And this all comes from the school of thought that everything in Africa was created by a non-black person. We see right here that this is an abandoned view, and the authors have misrepresented I.M. Diakonoff by writing this Eurocentric paper. Notice what it says right here, how they write that Diamond and Bellwood have both failed to engage the 5 decades of Afro-Asiatic scholarship that rebuts the Great White Takeover in the first place. And they do that a lot with African history. They will just simply fail to engage with the massive amounts of evidence that their colleagues have put before them. But that's a story for another day. What we do know is that there's well-grounded linguistic research that places the Afro-Asiatic homeland either in the Southeast Sahara or somewhere around the Horn of Africa. Diakonoff's work was influential, and we see that he continued to adhere to a long-held position of an exclusively African origin. And Diakonoff had revised the common Semitic homeland to be straddling the Delta and Sinai. And we see these African links to pre-Neolithic cultures in not only the Levant, but in Africa south of Egypt. And the evidence south of Egypt is older than the evidence in the Levant. And if we look down at the bottom of the page, we see how they're talking about movements from Africa into the Levant. And this is consistent with linguistic arguments for a pre-Neolithic migration of early people out of Africa into the Sinai. This is important because all we ever hear are stories about back to Africa migrations 500 million years ago. We always have arrows being drawn towards us, but there's never any arrows drawn where we're going somewhere. And this is all a part of the Great White Takeover of Northeast Africa. But there was no takeover. The reality of what happened is the ancient ancestors left from the Afro-Asiatic homeland and went up into all these areas that we associate with ancient history. And we're going to be getting deeper into that. Let's do it. Here we have a map, another major area in African history. The Afro-Asiatic homeland evidence is the strongest in these areas. When we look at the genetic analysis, specifically of the Y chromosome, the genetic data supports the hypothesis that people left from the Horn of Africa or Southeastern Sahara and went north to the Nile Valley, up to Morocco, the Levant, up into the Greek areas. And this is supported by not only genetic evidence, archaeological and anthropological evidence. So when we go back to this quote right here, we now have a little bit of background now when we see that the great explorer Livingstone said that the Negro face as he saw it reminded him more of that on the monuments of ancient Assyria than of the popular white fantasy. And we can see why Petrie believed that the second dynasty of the Egyptians was overthrown by Ethiopians, and the great art of the 4th and 5th dynasties arose out of that. Because it's like I said before, these people, all these stuff that we're talking about today, they've always known these things. This is why they spend so much time creating fantasy stories. When we get back to the Afro-Asiatic language family, we see that the archaeology of North Africa does not support early Neolithic demic intrusion from Asia. That says clearly, once again, that there was no takeover of North Africa in ancient times, which is something that they always want you to imagine in your mind. And what I have highlighted in green right here goes hand in hand with what I talked about on my last series on the origins of the pre-dynastic. indications of early African farmers in the FAM initially incorporating Near Eastern domesticates into an indigenous foraging strategy. And we also see that this is inconsistent with their fantasy takeover. That in itself goes hand in hand with what Maria Gatto wrote here when she says that most of the activities connected with the Neolithic package in other areas of the world were already present in Nubia, and this includes the domestication of animals. So that when the domesticated sheep and goats started coming in from the Levant around 6000 BC, they had already had experience in doing that. And then right here at the bottom of the page, furthermore, there's evidence that cattle domestication independently occurred in the Holocene in the Eastern Sahara, blah, blah, blah. So we come back to the Afro-Asiatic study where the evidence indicates that the early African farmers up there initially incorporated Near Eastern domesticates into an indigenous strategy. You see how the evidence on this channel goes hand in hand. So we come back to this Afro-Asiatic story. The same archaeological pattern occurs west of Egypt, where domestic animals and grains were gradually adopted after 8,000 to 7,000 years before present into the established pre-agricultural Caspian culture that was present across North Africa, Northern Sahara, since 10,000 years ago. And all of this is important when they come to you with this fantasy sort of vision of some sort of non-black thing coming in and showing everybody what to do. And then we see at the bottom of the page, of course, doubt should be cast on the idea of a unidirectional spread of food production from Asia. Because with these people, everything is from Asia, you know, when that's just nothing more than them being thieves. Western Europeans trying to be thieves. And also with this early Afro-Asiatic proto-language, we have supporting views that herding and cultivation emerged separately in each branch, distinctly after the proto-language period. So this tells us basically that the languages were diversifying into the different ones. As for this paper, they do a very good job at completely shutting down Diamond and Bellwood and go by point with many facts that the original homeland of the Afro-Asiatic family is inside Africa. The language of the Arabs and everyone else, it all comes from these original African people who are right here on this map that you see on your screen. So when we move forward and read about this data in the genetic analysis about the Y chromosome phylogeography, we see that that supports the hypothesis of people leaving from those areas up into all of the ancient world, where we have Babylon, we have Assyria, we have everything. Troy, Rome, Greece, and more importantly, the Natufian people. There is most definitely some sort of African component with these people. And what's important about the Natufians is they were a part of the whole revolution of agriculture. And they say that it's agriculture which is what led to civilization. And these Near Eastern farmers then went into Europe and taught the Europeans how to farm, thus bringing civilization to these people. And when it comes to Europe, especially the Northern Europeans, many of them took thousands of years to even get around to agriculture in the first place. Let's not forget what they're talking about when West African R1 DNA comes up. It's always Tyler left from Eurasia and went to Cameroon, when it very well could have been the other way around. Someone's ancient African ancestor could have easily been chilling somewhere in Eurasia and then did a back migration to Africa. Let's not forget that everyone in the world has a back to Africa migration except for the indigenous people that are already there. Here we have a map of haplogroup E, which is an African bloodline, and all of the areas in which they're talking about here, which we all talk about, these are all of the areas that are colored on the map, which shows the areas that we've been to. Now, when you look at a Neolithic European map, these sort of maps are typical where they have arrows going in every single direction possible. Never mind the fact that they were hardly in Europe at that time. So I decided to make my own map. And what I did was I drew some arrows on the map. And I'm here to tell you today that every single arrow that I drew on this map is backed up by data. Movements up and down the Sahara, across the Sahara, up and down the Nile. We have dispersions leaving up out of the Ethiopian areas. And we also cannot forget about the Nilotic migrations down as far as Mozambique. And early in history, the Khoisan went all the way up to Ethiopia and have even made it clear up to Morocco. And so, again, we never get these sorts of maps for ourselves. We always get maps with one direction where Europeans come in there, or we're walking somewhere on a Bantu migration. But all of that is a fantasy created to keep you in Negro land. And you see the main areas, their three jewels that they created for themselves, which is the Middle East, the Greek world, and Spain. And we were in those areas long before they were there. And so it doesn't take a rocket scientist to see that we've been to all these areas. When we look at this map right here, we can see that all of these things matches up with exactly where we've been. There became a juxtaposition. This is why we have certain artifacts like this, where you have the so-called black person sitting up next to the so-called non-black person. And this went on a lot in ancient history. Here we have a Phoenician example. And even when you want to take a look at things from a biblical perspective, all of these kingdoms that you see right here, that's the sons of Ham. The Akkadians, Babylon, all of that, son of Ham. Canaan, son of Ham. And so when we take a look at the table of nations in the Bible, it actually matches up, when you think about it, to not only the genetic evidence, the archaeological evidence, and everything else. Which is an interesting thing to note. And again, it gives us a little bit of background as to why Livingston said that the Negro face reminded him of an ancient Assyrian. To this day, I wonder what the hell was he looking at. Of course, you know, they destroy stuff, throw it away, you know what I'm saying, create fake evidence. But we were most definitely in ancient Assyria, most definitely in ancient Persia, most definitely in Babylon, Sumerian, all of that. You know, living alongside of whoever else was there. You know, they said those places were the sons of Ham for a reason. When we think about the spread of this language group, the Afro-Asiatics, and we think about the genetic data that has us go into all of the ancient areas of the known world that these people worship, we were there every single time. And one thing that we can say for sure is that a Germanic person was most definitely irrelevant at these times. You know what I'm saying? And you know, that's the part that really makes them mad, is the whole Western European aspect and them being missing. You know, but that's not our fault. Thank you very much for watching. Until next time.